All right, everyone, welcome to the show today. Now, if you've been listening for the past several weeks, you have heard us say multiple times that in January, we are launching a new podcast, and we're partnering with Jillian Johnsrud to bring this to you and to the community. The title of the podcast is Everyday Courage, and Brad, I'm really excited to actually announce that this, as of today, is live.
Yeah, this is a big day. Big day. 4 episodes exist in the world as of today. So, yeah, obviously you're listening to this podcast. Take your phone, take your player, whatever it is, go to search, look up Everyday Courage, and hit subscribe.
Wait, how many seconds do you think it would take for a avid podcast listener, someone that is used to listening to podcasts? How long do you think it would take for them to press pause, press search, search for the podcast, and press subscribe?
I think you could do that in sub 15 seconds very easily.
I would like to have a 15 seconds of silence while everybody listening to this podcast goes and does that now. Brad, can you be quiet for 15 seconds?
Can you?
Jillian, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So the title of the podcast is Everyday Courage. Why does this podcast exist?
We became financially independent about 4 years ago, and I felt like we had been really intentional with our life up to this point. We had done a lot of things. We had been able to adopt 4 kids. We had traveled to 27 countries. We had bought our house with cash and renovated it. And it really felt like we had been leaning in and doing things along the way as we grew our financial independence. But becoming financially independent was still a big transition. Just because you have a lot of options that being good with money creates doesn't actually do the work for you. You still have to learn to be awesome in your life and in your work and carving out meaningful work. And I find, especially with women, it's even harder because sometimes we start to lose some of our identity. If we went to college, we might not be doing what we went to college for anymore. And then along the way, we've worked a few different jobs and we've had kids and maybe we've gotten married. And now we're at this point where if we're good with money, yay, we have all these options. But what do I want to be when I grow up? You know, what do we want the rest of our life to look like? What is really important to us? And these are questions that we should be asking all along the journey, no matter where you are on the financial independence spectrum. How do you want to use that financial freedom to just have a better life, to have more meaningful work?
And Jillian, I just wanted to bring this up for people who aren't familiar with your story is when they hear, oh, we reached financial independence, we paid for our house in cash, we visited 27 countries, people could think, oh, what were her and her husband? Were they partners in law firms or something like this? I'd love for you to give a background a little bit more on your actual story.
Yeah, I'm not a lawyer. Never did law school. My husband graduated with a degree in social work. I didn't finish college. He joined the military, and especially as a military spouse, we kind of moved. So I worked in Starbucks, I worked in HR, I did commission sales. We just kind of took whatever jobs were available in that city at that time that kind of fit my skill set. So together, our combined incomes, if you include all of the military benefits, I don't think they ever topped $70,000 or $80,000. We were both kind of in that $30,000 a year income, even when we lived in the DC area.
You said something in there on your journey, which I think resonated with me, and I think probably your audience leaned into as well. And that was that loss of identity. All these different things that you're leaning into are taking a little piece of you, and that center is slowly, eroding. And I'm curious, when you talk about learning these lessons about yourself, practically speaking, what did that look like for you on this journey?
Yeah, it was twofold. I felt like I was trying to do that work consistently of learning who I am and going to therapy and reading and continuing to invest in myself and my education. But there's so much external pressure. I remember at the last job I worked at, and one of my coworkers and one of my friends, I was talking about my younger brother and how he's fairly successful, and I kind of described how he was successful. And I said, and I'm successful. And she looked at me and she goes, wait, how are you successful? And it just struck me to my core because from the outside, I lived in a very modest house. I was driving this like 16-year-old beater Honda Civic. I didn't have a great degree. I didn't wear fancy clothes. Like, I didn't have this amazing career. And she was like, I understand why she asked, like, how do you consider yourself successful? And I just said, I've accomplished everything I've set out to, and I've chased down all of my dreams. And 2 years later, we became financially independent, and like, that's still what I'm doing. But it's so easy to let the external world define how we're successful. What boxes do they think we need to check before they'll sign off on the fact that we're living a life that's true to ourselves and what matters to us?
Wow. Yeah, one of the things as you were saying that, and I know you've worked with people all along across the spectrum on their path to financial independence, and I'm curious, like that's always going to be consistent when you're making the choice not to own all the stuff, right? The outside world doesn't see that. They don't, and I think the outside world, for better or worse, that's the only metric they can see, and that's what they see other people do. So that's how they measure you: the size of your house, the number of your cars, your wardrobe, whatever, the trappings of success. And when you're working with individuals, how do you counsel them? Like, what's the counterbalance for that in terms of anchoring your identity to something that isn't dependent on the outside world's approval?
We really have to be clear about what does matter to us, because we can't do all the things. We can't be everything to everybody. And if we take the pressure of everyone else's expectations, and that might be our parents, and that might be our friends, or our coworkers, or society at large that says, here's who we think you should be, we start to lose who we are, and we start to just float through life living someone else's best life, maybe, but it sure as heck isn't ours. So I think it's that process of constantly being intentional and self-reflective of, who am I? Why am I here? What are my gifts? What am I passionate about? What do I value? In this next decade, like, what are some things I really want to accomplish? And the more clarity and confidence we have in our choices, the easier that we can stand up when our coworkers are like, how in the world are you successful? Like, that's a bold statement. You can say, I did my thing. I had my dreams. I got married when I was 19 years old, and we really wanted to adopt kids. I was super passionate about that. We really wanted to travel. I really wanted to be able to pay cash for a house. Like, those were my big dreams. And by 29, we had done all of that. And in that process, it meant not doing a whole bunch of other things.
Yeah, I think that saying no to things is one of the most difficult aspects of being an adult, and I've found being a parent. And I'm curious, for so many people out there who, I mean, sadly, don't have any dreams of their own anymore because they're just living that every day, just trying to get through the day, trying to get through the month. And maybe their identity is now wrapped up in their spouse or their kids. How do they have that first awakening, that first moment where they realize, okay, it's really important to prioritize myself, maybe for the first time in a decade or more?
For me, growing up, we grew up in kind of a challenging, somewhat chaotic environment. Um, and and as a kid, I was not a superstar of a child. I was very anxious and I was dyslexic. So I was really struggling in grade school. So there was no Brad in my corner being like, "Oh, Jillian, you're a superstar." It was a little hard to see this like really anxious, super shy kid who couldn't like unscramble letters and numbers. Um, but every day I would come home after school and I would grab a Pop Tart and I would sit down in front of the TV and I would watch Oprah. And every day she showed up with different guests and with different ideas. And I know she was like a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But for me, she gave me hope. Like hope that life could look a little bit different. Hope that I had more agency than I believed. Hope that like I could change and I could grow and maybe my life could be bigger than what everyone else assumed it could be. And it only took watching her every single day after school for a decade till I started to believe it. Like maybe this little tiny town and this difficult situation that I was born into doesn't have to be my story. Maybe there's more out there. And I think with this podcast, that's what I want to give to people. If you don't feel like you have hope right now, just keep showing up and hang out with me once a week and we'll chat a little bit and we'll tell some stories and we'll talk to some people and hopefully it doesn't take you a decade like it took me, but at some point you'll start to believe that life can look different and it can be bigger, and you can be courageous to take charge and to make changes.
I actually want to talk about the the goals for the show in terms of you're kind of framing this as seasons of life, seasons of the show, and as we go into a new year, I know a lot of people are coming to this new year with aspirations that this is going to be the year. And I'm curious for this first season that you're mapping out, what's the plan?
Yeah, I love the new year. So for so many years, I was obsessed with setting New Year's resolutions and New Year's goals. And it is a brand new year and it's a brand new decade. And I'm so excited about that. Like a whole new decade of our life is starting. And I definitely want to help give people some tools and some ideas and some stories of how to really start being intentional with our money and our work and our life, how to start crafting a plan for this year, for this decade, to start it off right. And we've got some amazing stories of people who've gone through those challenges and those struggles and have learned some lessons and have come out on the other side to really transform their life. So I'm so excited for you guys to hear these.
I love that you're pointing out, honestly, it really hadn't clicked with me that we're talking about a brand new decade and designing your best year, designing your best decade. And there's this quote that I've heard you mention past, you've talked about it, but it's from Bill Gates. And it's basically saying we have so many goals that we try to throw into like a day or a week or whatever, and they seem unattainable. But if you were to scale that out and you say, well, I have a decade to accomplish these goals, it's really, almost anything is possible in a decade. If you give yourself a decade, of course it's possible. What do the small actions look like that drive me towards that goal? I love that framework. I'm curious actually about when you decided the frame for the show and the length of the show specifically. We have a longer format show. It typically runs somewhere in between 15 minutes to an hour and 15 minutes. You're very much targeting a sub 20-minute show. Like 8 minutes is your perfect length. What's your why behind that?
I think it can be so overwhelming sometimes, if we don't feel like we have the luxury of these long, rambling, uninterrupted moments in our day. Not that you guys are rambling.
Jonathan is chuckling to himself with the word rambling.
So many words, all the great words.
Never rambles, never rambles.
But I had never listened to podcasts for a long, long time. I had just started in the last year, and the biggest pain point for me, and the reason I didn't listen, is it just didn't fit into my life. I like audio, but I didn't know where to put it. I can't do it while I'm cooking dinner, especially an hour-long episode, because my kids have questions every 3 minutes. And I don't have a really long commute. And even when I'm in the vehicle, like the vehicle with all these kids, and they're like laughing and fighting and crying and yelling, yells of joy sometimes. And so I wanted to create something that felt like it was doable. Like we could fit it in. Like we have 8 minutes, we have 10 minutes. And while I love long format podcasts, like if I'm going to be on an airplane, like airplane time is my long format podcast time. I'm like, sweet, 1.5 hour episodes. I just load those and I'm like 2 episodes until the plane lands. So when I first, we adopted our 3 kiddos in the middle. And I remember when they first showed up at our house, and it was so overwhelming. Like, they had 12 appointments a week, and there were all of these professionals in our lives, and it was emotionally stressful, and so many things had to go away. And I had I had a little whiteboard because I'm obsessed with whiteboards, and it said like
Colored markers.
exercise. I love all the things. It said exercise and goal 6 minutes. And I had little dashes, and a friend came over with her husband, and he looked at my whiteboard, and he said to his wife, like, 6 minutes at a time, or like 6 1-minute exercises. And my friend was like, 6 1-minute exercises, because that's what I had. I had a minute. I knew that I had 60 seconds that I probably wouldn't be interrupted, that like nobody would be asking me a question or trying to crawl on me. And so sometimes we just have to use what we have. Maybe you show up to a meeting 10 minutes early and you've got 8 minutes. Maybe you're, commuting and you have these little small windows. And even those people that feel a little stretched thin and a little overburdened, like, I feel like we're the ones that need it the most. We need someone to speak some encouragement into our life, someone that we can give us just a little pep talk and a little cool idea that we can carry with us into the rest of our day and all of what that entails.
So everyone, this is our Friday roundup, but it's not very often that we get to announce such a special podcast that is now, as of today, existing in the universe. And wow, it's pretty incredible. But I guess MK, as someone that really brings in the community to this show, what are your thoughts on this?
I am beyond excited. This is 100% the content that I am here for. And I know it's going to mean so much to our community. We get so many questions where people have the financial aspect down and they want to know, well, what's next? How do I reach these other bigger goals? And every time I've interacted with Jillian, whether it's listening to her on another podcast or reading her newsletter or in person, she just has this amazing calming effect. But at the same time, I'm inspired. Like, I leave every 2-minute conversation just thinking like, oh, I can do anything. And so I just can't imagine the impact that's going to have for so many people who haven't had the chance to talk with her in person, that they're going to get to listen to her through these episodes and get to know her and feel that same sense of inspiration and I can do anything and I can take that away. So I can't wait to see how our community is going to thrive as they are listening to this podcast.
So Brad, everyday courage, someone's listening to this and they want to go ahead and they want to, what is our community to do next?
Yeah, there's one thing to do today. Just you're listening to this podcast on a podcast player, go to subscribe, search Everyday Courage, hit subscribe. 4 episodes exist in the world right now. It's going to be 1 a week, thereabouts, thereafter. But go hit subscribe and listen to those 4 episodes. I guarantee you, your life will be enriched by doing that.
And everyone, I don't know if this came through when we were recording the episode, but this podcast is under the Choose FI umbrella. This podcast is part of the Choose FI family. If you want to support Choose FI, if you want to benefit dramatically from the information that is contained, do what Brad said. Go on your podcast search of choice, go to search for Everyday Courage and add that to your playlist today. Make that your one thing this week and every week thereafter.
Let's go out and be a little bit more courageous every day, because adventure awaits.
Oh, chills.
Jillian, we are so excited to have you part of the Choose FI family. This is just incredible. I could not think of a better way to start off a new year and a new decade. So, like you said, adventure awaits indeed.
Oh, it's for YouTube.
Let's not
Can we get Jillian in the happy dance?
I love dancing.
It's a happy dance.
I'm so excited there's video.
We got video.
I'm the only non.
Yeah, but now you're the non-dancer. You're standing out,
Oh,
Brad.
I could show you my Muppet dance.
Oh,
Okay.
this is doable.
Did
There's
you
a
watch
Muppet.
the Muppets
Yeah.
in the 80s? Okay, so I was obsessed with the Muppets. So the Muppets have like little, poles
Yeah.
that go from their wrists. So they've got 2 moves.
Okay.
They've got this move.
Okay.
This is how they can move their hands.
Just back and forth.
It's kind of like, but if you imagine like little sticks, like the puppet
Yep,
master is doing
I've
this,
never-
and they're doing this, and they can do this. This is all they got.
This is like before the Dougie, before the floss.
Yeah, this is
I'm just puppet dancing over here.
Yeah, this is lesson 1 for me. Well,
Yep. Okay, I'm with you. All right, YouTubers, like, comment, subscribe if you want more of this content. We'll see you next time as we continue to go down the road less traveled.